Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and today I'm going to be looking at a prototype of Role Player Adventures. The campaign on Kickstarter is over. This is a very successful Kickstarter campaign, but the pledge manager is still open. I managed to get my hands on a prototype after the campaign, and I thought that I would give it a look and share it with you. So here's a setup game of Role Player Adventures. There are a few tokens that aren't in frame, but what I decided to do is just give a pretty quick overview of what's in this game and what it can do, because there are some limitations on what we can show of further adventures, because, spoiler alert, and there are already playthroughs of the very first adventure out on the internet. So I'm going to give this the concise treatment, and I'm going to focus on the things that I think make this game mechanically special so that you can decide if it's for you. Role Player Adventures is a choose-your-own-adventure game, but as you can see, it's got a whole lot of other stuff going on. There are a lot of board game components here that you don't need in a choose-your-own-adventure if you're going all the way down to the bare bones, but this is the sort of deluxe experience. So I want to talk you through what aspects of the game are added in so that you know if this is the kind of choose-your-own-adventure that you would like. So in the campaign, there's going to be several of these storybooks. So here's adventure number 1, Battle at Blacklake. And as with most choose your own adventure games, it's going to work pretty much the way you think it would. So let's just zoom in for a look. After setup, your adventure begins, and it says, as a King's Guard soldier in the regiment of Commander Zalek, a dark elf, you have fought a long war. The Dragul, a coalition of northern tribes, invaded Nalos, your homeland. After many battles, you've driven off their hordes, but rumors spread through the camp of a new Dragul plot. One night, you are summoned to Commander Zalek's tent, where you find him arguing over a map with General Grick, an orc. A gold coin marks the southern city of Sabak. A vial of elixir marks a swamp to the west. General Grick raises an eyebrow when you enter. So you're Zalek's best, he asks, looking over you skeptically. We have a special mission for you, but first, a question of strategy. Zalek wants to take your regiment south to investigate a threat to the capital, says Grick, pointing to the coin. Then, pointing to the vial, I think we should push west and capture a powerful Dragul agent in the swamps. What say you? So obviously you're going to pick a side. You can decide to side with General Grick and learn more about the Dragul plots, or you can side with Commander Zalek and investigate threats to the capital. Either way, the game is afoot, and you'll be faced with a series of choices of this nature repeatedly as the game goes on. So now I want to talk about who you are in the game and how you resolve some of those choices. This game is for 1 to 4 players, so it'll bounce a little bit differently for more players. I played this solo, obviously. And you also have options about the kinds of characters to choose. So this is one of the pre-generated characters for the game. She is a sorceress and a dark elf, and she comes with her own set of stats. And she also has her own deck of cards. I'm going to talk about her, and then I'm also going to talk about importing characters from Role Player in just a moment. So you'll be tracking your own character. There's also a party journal where you track things like the amount of gold you have, any titles that you might have earned, this bonus play should go here, and your current reputation with various factions. So there are different factions in the game you'll interact with, and you can gain or lose their favor. So you can have the King's favor, Starlit Door favor, Dragul favor, but it's up to you to decide who you want to side with, who you want to try to get to like you, and of course you may gain favor with one faction and lose favor with another. You'll also be tracking your XP here, any keywords that you may have earned. So if you pick up various keywords throughout the game, you may come to choices where you can do something special if you have a specific keyword. And then titles or cards that you can earn throughout the course of gameplay that also can impact your future game because they open up a different range of choices. So all the things that you're tracking in your party journal are things that are going to impact your future in the game and will open up new avenues of choice for you the further on you play. You can also have items for the party, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So we have choices and we have consequences. Pretty classic choose your own adventure fare. But what makes Role Player Adventures different and interesting is that it has its own role player spin on the entire matter of playing through this sort of choose your own adventure RPG adventure story. And the main place where this shines is in skill checks and in combat, which operate very similarly to each other, and we're going to talk about them right now. So any skill check that you need to pass is going to have information about it somewhere in this skill book. So throughout the skill book, you're going to have, maybe you want to charm someone, concealment, deception, endurance. And there are a number of other challenges in here: interpretation, might, and all of these challenges scale. So for a 1-player game, you're going to have to get these dice results, but in a 4-player game, you're going to need more. And what's interesting here is that unlike in something like a D&D skill check, where you just roll a d20 and see what happens, or roll a die with a different number of faces on it, in Role Player Adventures, you're going to have to get certain die values of certain die colors. So these outlines actually do represent die colors within the game. So you can need to do something with white dice, red dice, either a black or a green die. Here in Concealment, you're going to need combinations of black, green, purple, and white. So not only do you need to roll specific die results, but you're going to need to roll results that are particular colors. And each of those colors is represented in your character's stats. And in fact, they correspond to the exact same stats that are part of a character that you built in Role Player. So red is strength, black is dex, green is constitution, blue is intelligence, white is wisdom, purple is charisma. So what makes skill checks in Role Player Adventure particularly interesting is that to get to those very specific die colors and values, you have a couple of choices. The first is to actually spend some of your stat cubes and put them over here, where they are no longer available as part of your die rolls, and they also cause you to collect fatigue. If you get enough fatigue, then that is basically losing your health and you die. So we can't handle more than 16 fatigue over here. But you also have to tire yourself out in order to achieve anything if you are working hard. So if I, for example, let's look something up. So let's say that I am trying to pass a concealment check. As a solo player, I'm going to need a black 3, a green 2, and a black or green 5. I do have black and I do have green, but I'm going to need to decide how I want to handle my dice. Here I have a dice limit of 4, which means that I can roll a total of 4 dice in an attempt to complete this check. And I can choose how I'm going to get those dice. So your first option is you can actually just randomly draw dice from the dice bag and hope that you get the colors that you need. So if I just want to see what happens because I don't want to spend anything, I can grab 4 dice from the bag. And one of them was a black die, but the other 3 weren't. If I want to guarantee myself that I'm at least rolling dice of the correct color, I could spend any number of my dex and con stamina in order to roll dice of the matching colors. So I could put 1 dex over here and guarantee myself 1 black die. I could put a dex and a con to guarantee a black and a green, or I could go wild and put all 3 over here to try to pass this skill check. However, if I do that, not only am I a little bit more fatigued, but I don't have these skills available to me on a future skill check. So if I go hog wild and do everything that I can to pass this concealment check, there may be a check coming in the future that I'm too fatigued to deal with adequately. And if you don't have any cubes to use, it's going to put you right back in a situation where you have to draw dice from the bag and hope for the best. It may also be that you feel like you only need a couple of these cubes and you want to take a calculated risk to see how things work out, in which case you can absolutely draw from the bag and see how things go. There's also an added level of complexity to this, because just because you drew a purple die doesn't mean that you can't somehow turn it into a green 2. That's because in Role Player Adventures, not only do you do your best to see how well you can roll, but you can manipulate those rolls to do everything that you can to get what you want. So maybe you want a lot of purple dice regardless of what the skill check is, because you have a lot of powers that let you manipulate purple. The way that you build your character is going to just make some adjustments to that as you go. So in addition to your stat sheet and your starting money and your starting special ability, what you're going to get is a hand of cards. So this Dark Elf Sorceress starts with a certain number of cards that are going to give her the ability to manipulate her dice in various ways. So you can convert a 1 to a 3 or a 4. You can adjust the die totals by 1, or change dice from one color to another. All of these cards are giving you ways to turn something that maybe you didn't want into something that you did, if you can just use them cleverly enough. There's also a play limit on your cards, so on a given skill check, I can only play 4 of my cards. I can't just go crazy and play my entire deck. So you also have to be very efficient in the number of moves that you make, not only because you exhaust cards, but because you can only play a certain number. Having a bonus play helps, so I can use that to play a 5th one, but bonus plays are also expendable, and it kind of stinks to run out of them. So you have to decide how far you want to go for a certain skill check, How hard do you want to push it? How many resources do you want to use? There's very much a push your luck element to this aspect of the game. So combat actually works very similarly to a skill check, except that combat takes place over the course of 3 rounds, and some rounds have consequences that damage you the further you go into a battle. This one just takes some experience points away from you. But just as with a skill check, you're going to need to roll dice that get certain results to defeat an enemy with certain rewards and consequences. And also each enemy is going to have a special status. So I just drew these randomly. This doesn't come from the game at all. So you have a Ravenous Cultist. So at the start of each round of combat, you return any 1 die from this enemy card to the dice bag. So the Cultist just kind of keeps coming back at you and recovering a little bit every round of combat. So once again, you have this system where you are trying to roll dice of specific colors, and then you're trying to manipulate the dice that you do have and that you did roll to get the results that you desire. So this actually leads me to one of the other things that I wanted to discuss, which is that you can actually import a character from Roll Player into Roll Player Adventures. So in this case, I just have some kind of set stats, and I have an automatically generated hand of cards, but some of these cards you might recognize. If you've played Roll Player, for example, you've definitely seen a Mystic Cloak before. So instead of playing a pre-generated character, what you could do is you can play a game of Roll Player. You can use your actual stats from that game and import them into this game. And you can also have a hand of cards that directly correlates with cards that you gained for yourself during the game of Roll Player. So instead of just having some random stats and random cards, you can actually have things that you personally went for in the Roll Player game. So Roll Player is a game about rolling a character. Well, with Roll Player Adventures, that character can actually go somewhere and do something, which I think is super cool. So if that's the kind of continuity that you're looking for, then Roll Player Adventures might be super, super exciting for you. The other thing that I wanted to talk about that I thought was really neat is the use of items in this game. So there will be various numbered items that you can pick up throughout a game of Roll Player Adventures, and not only can you attempt to use them in pretty much any situation, but you can even combine items with other items, and I think that is hilarious. So I don't want to show too much, but in the back of each of these adventure books, there is a key that gives you a combination of letters and numbers. The letters correspond to locations on the map. The numbers correspond to the number on the item cards that you might have earned throughout the game. So if you get a chance to use an item in a certain location, let's say that I'm in A and I want to use item 3, I would look up A3 in the back of the book and see if it gives me anything. If I have 2 items, I could look up A3.14 and see how those items interact, if they do at all. So there's a lot of creativity that's built into the game, but that's very nicely structured so that you're not, totally inventing things for yourself, but there are ways to kind of push boundaries and see, if I push this button, what'll happen. The other thing that's quite interesting in this game is death. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but let's just say that death is not necessarily the end of the game of Roll Player. So if I run out of health, I get overly fatigued, then I'll die. But some interesting stuff might happen instead of me just being dead and having to go all the way back to the beginning of the game, which I think is a very good way to handle a choose your own adventure where you're going to want to keep adventuring even if you lose a combat or get unlucky with your skills. So that's a quick overview of some of the things that make Roll Player Adventures interesting. It's a choose your own adventure, but it's one that has a map, several different decks of cards that can add spice to the game, an interesting system for skill checks and combat that lets you push your luck a bit, but also use your cleverness with cards to push your character to the max, some fun uses of items, and some very interesting encounters with death. So if you want a choose your own adventure that has all of those extras, and that feels a bit more like a board game while still being a choose your own adventure, then I think something like Roll Player Adventures might be worth looking at for you. If you prefer the bare bones solo RPG experience, then this one may not be your thing. But I think it's really interesting. I'm really looking forward to seeing future adventures. I personally would like to play a campaign of this to the end, so I'll be waiting for this to come out. It's going to be a little while. The Pledge Manager doesn't close until February 2021. But I was sent a prototype of this after the Kickstarter campaign, and I thought that I would give it a look for you. Hope you enjoyed it, and happy gaming.